So, Top Gear for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The first game in what would become a long-running racing game franchise series thing. Originally released in 1992 and having nothing to do with the television series of the same name, Top Gear is one of the earlier racing games to grace the Super Nintendo. Never would have guessed. You could pick from one of 4 cars, each with varying stats and attributes, and you get to race against other cars around the world to win the right to be called the fastest driver in the world. Unfortunately, this game was released before Super Mario Kart was anything but a figment of some hapless designer's imagination, so you have no weapons of mass destruction to lay waste to your foes as you race your way to the finish line. No, you actually have to make your way past all the cars and try not to hit anything that might slow your progress. Of course, you have nitro boosters to give yourself a quick speed boost, but try to keep an eye on your fuel gauge. If it gets too low, stop by a pit shop or risk it all for one last ditch effort to clear that final lap, and that sort of thing. There are 8 countries in Top Gear, each spanning 4 tracks. The tracks are your usual closed circuit races where you drive around in laps with the goal of finishing first, or at least in the top positions. There's some hills and valleys and dirt roads and the occasional pit stop to refuel when you need it. You know, that sort of thing. When you clear all the tracks, place yourself in the top 3 positions and whatever the minimum criteria happens to be, you get a password that unlocks the next nation and next set of 4 races to be driven. The passwords given differ depending on the skill level chosen by the player. In simplest terms, control is really tight here. Default control settings felt a bit awkward, but fortunately Top Gear offers 4 different control setups, including a reverse control setup intended for lefties, which is a bit of rarity in video games. Can't speak for its effectiveness since I'm not left-handed, but in any case, once that hurdle's out of the way, I found steering the car to be pretty tight and smooth. Response time's pretty good too, so there's no unintentional accidents to be had here. If you bump into something, you cannot blame the controls because they work brilliantly here. You can, however, blame this tree in the rainforest because it f***s me over every single time. And because of this tree, I lose out on my lifelong dream of racing in the Scandinavian 500. If anyone watching this video is planning on starting one of those Kickstarter things to raise funds on resources to destroy every single rainforest on the face of the planet, let me know because I'll be sure to add a couple bucks to that cause, just so I can have my revenge on this f***ing tree. But all joking aside, Top Gear does boast a decent amount of difficulty in some of these tracks. Mind you, this could be more due to the fact that I'm not much of a big racing, gaming guy more than anything, but I've noticed some tracks being particularly tricky than others, and then there's some I feel like are a breeze. It's almost like there's a lack of balance in the overall difficulty. There are some easier tracks in the middle, some harder tracks at the beginning, that sort of thing, but I suppose with a bit of practice, these tracks can be conquered. And there's 3 skill settings you could play around if it feels too easy or too difficult, depending on your cup of tea. The best thing I could say about Top Gear in terms of graphics is that it does come off as something of an offspring of the classic Sega racer Outrun. Not so much in terms of the gameplay, but just in the fact that there's hills and valleys and the visual style is kind of similar. And yeah, I know it's stretching it since they're both completely different games and they feature different cars for the player to drive, but Top Gear definitely sports some spiffy car designs. The tracks look pretty good in regards to the backdrops and surroundings, and most importantly, the game definitely possesses that sense of speed that you're really driving along at high speeds. It never feels or looks sluggish at any point, and Top Gear, for a 1992 release, looks pretty damn good overall. The only thing I don't like is the split screen. This is just fine in a 2-player game, but I much rather concentrate on how I'm doing in a race and not what my so-called rival is doing. You could tell he's supposed to be a rival because he's called Computer, a creative and wholly threatening name for a rival if there ever was one. Fortunately, they fixed that whole deal with the split screen in the sequel, but we'll get to that some other time. Another high point in Top Gear happens to be its soundtrack. A rather modest collection of highly energetic and appropriately badass driving tunes that get you pumped for a race. I actually like the soundtrack here, so much so that I actually burned a CD of the sound rip just so I could play the tunes while driving in real life. It's that good a collection of tunes. The sound effects are also pretty good. The engine sounds, the revving, the screeching, none of it makes you want to rip your ears off and stop the pain, and that's a good thing. They're well done and they complement the rest of the game as well as the music rather nicely. Overall, for a starting point in what would become a long-running racing franchise that would endure several console generations, Top Gear certainly has the key components in place for a rather enjoyable and slick racer on the Super NES. It's perhaps one of the best racers I've played on the console, and that has to be saying something considering this is a 1992 release when the console was considerably young. It's a fairly inexpensive game and easy to find, so if you like racing games on the SNES, Top Gear is definitely a top choice that not only offers a great racing experience, but also provided the template for its successors. But that is another story for another time.